Good morning. Welcome to another Peace Talks of the Universal Peace Federation. We're very, very happy that you're with us today for this very important program entitled Searching for Peace in Our Cities, a conversation about race, justice, trust, and community. We're living through challenging times. We've had webinars over the last couple of months on the COVID-19 crisis, on the emergence of the Cold War between the US and China, on problems that remain in the Middle East. And on top of that, we have seen in the United States a tragic killing of an African American by a police officer in Minnesota that has struck deeply into the heart of this country and is reverberated around the world. We are reminded of what some call the original sin of America with slavery and our tortured history of race in this country. So it has brought forward demonstrations that are being held widely throughout America, as I'm sure all of you are very aware. So we want today to have a conversation about what's going on in America now. What are its root causes? What are things we can do to overcome this current crisis and move beyond productively, constructively, and very positively to build the kind of world, the kind of community based on mutual trust and mutual respect, where the dignity and value of every human being is cherished, as well as our natural environment. We all want that world, but we're struggling to achieve it, and it seems to be coming out loud and clear at this moment in our national history. And I think this issue is not just a United States issue, but the spotlight is emerging out of the recent killing in Minnesota of George Floyd and others that have sparked so much outrage. So we have a strong panel. We have Dr. Michael Jenkins, who is president of UPF International and president and chairman of UPF in the USA, and Reverend B.J. Smith, who is from Minnesota, pastor, and organizes and leads in a non-governmental organization. We have Honorable Loretta Sanchez, who served some 20 years in the U.S. House of Representatives from California, and Dr. Professor William Lay from Criminal Justice Department at the University of Bridgeport, and Ms. Gloria Howard Geraldo, who is working with the Rotary Club in Minnesota, and finally from ACLC, its co-chairman and Methodist pastor, Dr. Luan Rao. So I'm going to ask first Dr. Michael Jenkins to kind of give some opening remarks about his experience over the last couple of weeks, particularly working with the UPF community and the American Clergy Leadership Conference, which is an affiliated organization of UPF. Dr. Jenkins?
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. I'm very grateful to be here, and good day to everyone throughout the world. The UPF International has been holding the peace talks very successfully on different topics, and Dr. Walsh and I spoke about the urgency of this matter. UPF USA has been partnering with the American Clergy Leadership Conference, and our pastors in Minneapolis and New York, Washington, LA, and also representatives of Congress, Democrats and Republicans. And we see hope. We see hope moving forward. But first of all, we want to express our sadness over the tragic death of Mr. George Floyd, which was clearly the abuse of power and terrible tragedy and murder that we see by a police officer of the Minnesota Police Department. We're saddened by the other officers who stood by. We're saddened by the terrible expression of pain and anguish and crying by citizens who were there trying to beg this officer to get off of Mr. Floyd. Now it's been upgraded to the second-degree murder, and the other 3 officers have been charged. But also what we saw was something that didn't happen in the past that I recall, even when there was the terrible trouble after Dr. King was assassinated or the riots in LA. This situation is quite different. Every race, every culture, every religion, every background are pouring out onto the streets, good people that really want to put an end to this kind of discrimination, and especially this tragic problem of people being hurt and the abuse of power and that kind of thing. Is just enough is enough. But the deeper issue is racism. It's not a simple topic. It's not something that we can easily say, well, I don't have that problem. I do find as I work with pastors and work with people from all different backgrounds that I too have to repent. I too have to come clear. I haven't loved my brothers and sisters from all races. We all have these shortcomings. We tend to aggregate with our own people. That's a typical history of mankind. And it all starts from the very beginning when God, asked Adam and Eve to obey his will, and the breakdown that occurred there. Jesus came and gave us grace, but we also see there's still conflict within us. And therefore, the religious leaders, we believe, play a very central role. And we know that many of the religious leaders in Minneapolis are working very hard during the day. They're doing a lot of the cleanup every day. And at nighttime, there are some bad actors that come out. And there is evidence, as the Chicago mayor indicated, clearly they're coming from outside. They're coming from outside of the community. The community doesn't want to burn down its own community. Bishop Noel Jones, when he was helping the ACLC develop a statement concerning this, a pastoral statement, he said it doesn't make sense that somebody gets in a fight outside of their house and then to express their anger, they come in and set their couch on fire. Nobody would do that. This is not coming from the community. It's coming from people who have other intentions. But that's always been the case. We believe that we have to come together beyond race. We've got to really, really deal with the problem of racism. It's not going to be something we're going to solve in the next couple of weeks or months. It's a process that we have to really come to terms with what our shortcomings are. And it really begins with me. It begins with me dealing with it. One thing that gives me a lot of hope, and my conclusion is that when we saw Ferguson burn and the tragedy there, that again came from a tragic death. And when we saw also Baltimore burn, and they burnt the CVS store, and the older gentleman in his 70s said, where am I going to get my medicine now? But Dr. Rouse and I, chairman of ACLC, we went to Charleston, South Carolina, 1 year anniversary after Dylan Roof killed the 9 people in the Bible study, including the pastor. We had a tremendous experience there because we heard from the people there as we gathered all the pastors for a memorial that Charleston was different because the black and white churches came together and they marched together, and there were people that came from outside ready to riot, ready to burn, to destroy, and the media was right behind them. But fortunately, black and white came together first and got in the lead of this process. And that's why Charleston didn't burn. And even one of the victims, Felicia Sanders, who survived that shooting, came out with a feeling that the only way I can overcome this incredible pain is not by hating my brothers and sisters from different races, is I have to forgive this person and understand that it was totally evil, the evil within. So we have hope from that Charleston experience. And we see the clergy like Reverend Smith here and others working across this nation now diligently with Dr. Rouse and Bishop Noel Jones to get ahead of this curve. We won't get ahead of it right in this cycle, but we've got to permanently get ahead of it so God's people come together. They're godly congressmen, Republicans and Democrats, the godly people of education and academia. All of the godly people need to come together. And I believe there's tremendous hope with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you for underscoring the importance and value of our churches, our faith-based organizations at this time, which are desperately needed for their insight, wisdom, and input, and hopefully modeling how we can come together. On that note, I'd like to turn to Reverend V.J. Smith, who is speaking to us from Minnesota. Reverend Smith, you have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you very much. God bless everyone. I'm excited to be on this call today. As yesterday, we had the funeral for George Floyd, and we provided safety and security for that funeral, among many others, as all the stars and the politicians and all the folks, the celebrities came to honor his life. As the national president of Mad Dads and a member of ACLC, I'm really energized to do a few things. There's 5 R's that I know that we have to do. The one is rebuild. We must rebuild our communities all across the nation. The second is reform. There must be reform in the work that we do, and then restructure. We have to restructure some of the systematic things that are happening right now in terms of police departments and politics, and then we got to revitalize. Our people are stressed out. They're worried. They're still getting over the epidemic, and now they're trying to figure out how to. They were just about open businesses, and then their windows got broken out, and now they're trying to figure out how do we double revitalize. We revitalize once. How do we do it again? And then the last one is refuse. We must refuse to go back to where we came from. We must refuse to go back to the system the way it was. We must refuse to let the status quo be the same again. We must have equality. It's an opportunity for us now to break the barriers. And the only thing that's really going to help us is God, and be God driven to make this change happen. We have to be focused and laser focused on transformation in our community.
Well, thank you very much, Reverend Smith. You made that very crystal clear with these the five R's, and I think they're all spot on. And we'll come back to that as we go further into our conversation together. But
yes, sir.
On that note, I'll shift now to the Honorable Loretta Sanchez. She has served in the U.S. House of Representatives, a Democrat from California from 1997 to 2017. And I'd like to invite Honorable Sanchez. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, of course, my sympathies and condolences to the family of George Floyd and to the people of Minnesota who have seen everybody in the nation rally around, and who, quite frankly, must be a little confused about how this is actually playing out on their turf. And I say that because in 2012, about the middle of July, we had, I represent my hometown of Anaheim, California. I represented it for 20 years in the United States Congress. And Anaheim, of course, is known for Disneyland. We have a lot of lower paid workers around that area who work at Disneyland, who work at the hotels, who work at the restaurants associated with tourism. And so there are parts of Anaheim that are very, very low income and very impacted, and just a difficult life for people. So in July of 2012, our police force, one of our police officers shot a young Latino man. His name was Manuel Diaz. And what erupted from that were riots in the city of Anaheim. They were called the Anna Drive because this shooting happened on Anna Drive, really a cul-de-sac filled with almost slumlord condition apartments where, of course, these hardworking people lived. And so they were very upset that this killing happened by our Anaheim police. But the interesting thing is that word got out, and so we ended up having these immense riots for 2 or 3 nights in a row. I will have to say that about 80 or 90% of the people who were involved in those riots weren't even from Anaheim. They actually came from other places, and there were fires, there were cars lit on fire. It was not an easy time for our city. And I say this because, of course, we saw this 8 years ago in my city. It was in a different backdrop. Of course, Orange County, California has about a 1.2% African American population, but it is about a 40% Latino population, yet those Latinos live probably in the worst areas of our cities. They are underemployed, or they are unemployed, or they're employed in difficult and low-paying jobs. And but I want to say that from that was very interesting, the several things that we did. First, we made a Blue Ribbon Commission that looked into what these officers had done. And we had real results from that. It took about 5 or 6 years, to tell you the truth. But more importantly, almost immediately, the mothers who lived on Anna Drive began to stand up and speak out and tell people who didn't belong there, who were rioting and who were causing problems, to get the heck out of their neighborhood, that they would take care of this situation. It was actually led by a young mother named Yesenia, and she galvanized all of the mothers of the neighborhood. And then the other thing that she did, she started to outreach to the public officials, and we came in and we started to make real strategic plans about what this community needed. And then we either put some public funds towards it, or, you know, I personally picked up the phone and called individual donors to ask to put money towards some of the programs that we needed for the young people in this neighborhood who just felt despair about everything that was going on. And one of the biggest players that we actually had was the Department of Justice at the federal level. They actually sent us 2 people who were sort of mediators and community kind of people who knew how to go out and to start working together for the long run to solve some of these issues. And they actually they were relocated to Anaheim, to these neighborhoods, and they lived here for 3 years while they involved themselves in the neighborhood, and they continued to talk to the leadership of the city and local and federal and state leadership, as well as community, to build the types of programs and to build the kind of trust back into the neighborhood. And it's all been really, really positive. And so, yes, in this George Floyd era, we have had a couple of demonstrations in the city of Anaheim. It was interesting. My husband drove down into the center of Anaheim yesterday to go visit a friend, and he said all of the businesses were boarded up because they were worried about the types of things we've seen on television in New York and LA and other areas happening. But nothing happened down there. There were protests, there were marches, but they were all very, very peaceful. And in some cases, hand in hand with some of our police department from the city of Anaheim. So I was very pleased to see that the very difficult work that we have been doing for the last 8 years actually paid off in this time of unrest that we've seen around the nation. And I would also just add, our clergy were very, very involved. I attend a predominantly African American church in Santa Ana, and our pastor from there went into Anaheim during that time to start working with the other churches, with the Catholic Church. I met with the bishop and said, you know, these are predominantly Catholics here. We need to invest more in our community from the church perspective. And so it was very important for our clergy to be involved at that time also in this neighborhood. So I guess I would like to say that we have to look at the positives that come out of some of this strife that we see, and we have to actually roll up our sleeves and get in there and involve ourselves in order to make sure that we have a better society, that we learn from what we see and that we move forward. And I'm very optimistic that this can happen across the United States. And I would like to say one last thing to Dr. Michael Jenkins, because I know that his foundations and his group work really quite a bit with the Congress members in bringing us together and having a shared vision for much of what society looks like. And I would just like to say, continue to work on that, because you know, when I turn on the television these days and I see Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, and I see Keith Ellison, who's the Attorney General of Minnesota, and I see so many of these people who are on the front line. They were all former members of Congress. And so what you concede in the Congress will pay many dividends as these people move on and go back to their own states and become the leadership for those states. Thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you very much for these very appropriate, insightful comments, and bringing to the fore the role again of faith-based organizations and the churches taking initiative and getting engaged. And I'm very happy you mentioned the role of mothers who truly can, and as you indicated, have played very much a role that is constructive and pulling the community together. So thank you. And indeed, this is a, you know, every movement, every group, unfortunately, has its bad apples or bad actors. Every crisis has opportunists who, on all sides, those that are trying to do good work will find that there are those that will get on the train but may have very different motives and a very different agenda. And this is part of the complexity of many social problems. There are people that have taken advantage also of the COVID crisis. So we need to be watchful about that. And sometimes we use the term original sin. And one thing about that theological concept is it kind of applies universally. So we have to always look at ourselves and also be self-critical of our own institutions. And anyway, let's move on. Thank you, Congressman Loretta Sanchez. I'd like now to invite Professor William Lay. He teaches criminal justice at the University of Bridgeport, and he's an attorney, and would like him to share his thoughts for our discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh, and thank you to the panelists who preceded me. I was really educated by your comments. I am the chair of our criminal justice department at the University of Bridgeport. We have in my classes and in my program, I have probably 50% persons of color, African American, Hispanic, and Asian. I teach U.S. legal system. I teach American government with the mayor of Bridgeport, Joe Ganim. He brings in his police chief, his officers to meet the students. I teach law and economics. I teach constitutional law. I've got students who will be law enforcement officers. They're aspiring to be police officers, FBI. One alumnus is a Secret Service agent, attorneys, prosecutors, corrections people. 1 week ago, we had a video assembly, a Zoom assembly, to just begin to listen and think about the matter. 20 courageous faculty and students participated, and it's not always easy to be there and to turn that video on and to speak. One of my colleagues, a Black woman professor, talked about raising her son, who's now ready to go to college, and giving him special warnings of how to conduct himself in public so that he didn't get labeled as an out of control young Black man. And I know she didn't want to put those kind of ideas in his mind or suppress him, but as a mother, she had no choice, and she shared that. Another one of my students, who is an African-American young woman, is now an assistant district attorney in Queens County, New York. She shared her feelings at being on the law enforcement side and how difficult it is for her. And, you know, I always remember her because when the first day of class, when she was a new student, I asked if anybody had the US Constitution, and she did. And her interest in it and her willingness to learn it has led her to be an assistant district attorney. Based on that and just my own way of looking at things, I do believe that a great listening is needed. A lot of listening needs to be done. And even if you're an academic or a police person who says that the racism is not systemic, it's individualized, I mean, I would say we just need to listen right now. And even if you're a person who feels that police have been misunderstood, let's say, we need to listen and listen with our heart. And the other thing I believe is what we have to address the tremendous economic imbalance and the imbalance of suffering. And I don't believe government can do it, because I think government interventions may lead to greater economic dislocation. Really, we need a lot of personal generosity. In other words, hearts must change, and it must translate into acts of personal generosity on the order of magnitude of taxation. Unless we have that, we're going to continue to have problems. Lincoln in his famous second inaugural address said that the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil would be sunk on the battlefield. And here we have, in this year of 2020, extraordinary year of 2020, we see, you know, as in Lincoln's terms, I mean, God may allow the wealth of America to be wasted by inflation and economic stagnation. I know there's a bounce back right now in the stock market, and unemployment is easing. That's wonderful. But let us not wait for collapse before we show generosity and address the extreme imbalance of resources and suffering. So those are some of my thoughts. Looking forward to maybe a little more dialogue with my fellow panelists.
Yeah, well, thank you, Professor Lay, and I applaud the concept of a great listening, and thank you for calling attention to the economic inequality that's out there. And we hear a lot of talk about the systemic issues, but also there is remaining the individual responsibility. What are the virtues that have been cultivated in our wider society, in our communities, that is needed if we're to hold together in trust and solidarity. Thank you very much. Our next panelist I'm happy to introduce, also from Minnesota, is Ms. Gloria Howard-Geraldo. She's actively worked for many years with Rotary Clubs, a very wonderful organization, and I invite Ms. Gloria Howard-Geraldo to share with us her thoughts.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to pick up on where Reverend V.J. Smith gave his 5 R's. And the one thing that I would like to add to that is, before we get to that, we need to rewrite the narrative, okay? So we need to go back to the beginning. Where I'm seeing is the root. We have to get to the root of it. We can do all these things. We've done some of them before. We will see some change, but will it be lasting change? Will it be a rewrite of the narrative? I think not. I think we'd be back here again if we do not reconcile for over 400 years ago and just come to the fact that, yes, it happened. This is how this country was built, but we can change what we're doing going forward. So I'm looking at it from that standpoint. It's a very difficult conversation to have. Many people would like to start from the 60s and Martin Luther King Jr.? Well, no, it began a long time before that. So we definitely have to go back to the very beginning. We have to educate everyone on America's history. Before moving to Minnesota, I thought most children in school were getting much of the African American experience in America during their history lessons. But when I got to Minnesota, I found that that was not so. I used to teach, and going into the classrooms, and some of the children in the classrooms, the scholars, I was in a mostly predominantly white area, and I had a young lady. She was a sophomore, I believe, and this class was for children that needed a little extra help. And she was just a beautiful, beautiful spirit. And she came to me one day and she said, "Miss Gloria," she said, "why is your hair so curly?" So I explained to her, and she said, "Can I touch it?" I said, "Of course you can touch it." And she said, "Well, what do you put in it?" And I explained to her. And I had a teacher come up to me, a white teacher, and said, "Why do you let her touch your hair like that?" And I said, "Because she needs to know what it feels like. She needs to know what I do with it. These are all the things that she's going to need to know going forward in her future, because she's going to run up upon many African American women of many different hair textures. And that curiosity, if I help her feel that today, imagine what that's going to do for her in her future." So I just look at it from, if we educate on where we come from as a nation and how we got to this point, then it will be much easier for us to begin implementing the 5 R's, because it'll be implemented out of empathy, out of compassion, out of love for our brothers and sisters, out of love for our country, out of love for what we want for our future generations who have to carry this forward. So I'm just overwhelmed at the fact that UPF is here and working with all those that can help us make this transition and make a difference. So I kind of thank you for that. But again, I just want everybody to think about, we have to go back to the root. If you're not sure about that, anyone out there, then start doing some research. Start talking to those that can help you understand it. Because we have to be empathetic with one another and understand where each is coming from. These are generational narratives that have been placed within us individually and within us as a society as a whole. So that's where I am today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ms. Gloria Howard Geraldo. Excellent comments and insights, and indeed this conversation about the root causes and about narrative. It's a word we use a lot in recent decades about giving the story of what happened. And indeed, we need to listen to the narratives and search together. So this is what we hope in some small way to accomplish through this, and you're helping us do that in this webinar. Our last panelist for opening statements is none other than Reverend Dr. Luan Rouse. He is United Methodist pastor and co-chairman of the American Clergy Leadership Conference. We're very happy to have you here, Reverend Rouse. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. It is always good to be in your company. You always bring together people with expertise and wisdom to help direct things for a better world. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for always being there, a good brother, peace and love. I'd like to say that as we search for peace and we look at the multiplicity of what is happening around us now, race is a problem that we do need to address, for it's been there since the 19th century for sociologists to begin to look at it. And in 1903, of course, W.E.B. Du Bois brought to us that it was the problem for the 20th century, the color line problem. And it is still with us today. And I will say here that it is not the only thing to look at, though, when we look at what has happened with the tremendous impact on all of us from the death of Mr. Floyd. That included race, but it also brought us to a problem that existed in the 20th century very heavily for us: police brutality, abuse. But it's being labeled now as murder, and we must look at that. In order to do that and also move towards a trust factor to have justice and to build a strong community, I propose that we take in the wisdom literature of Scripture. And in Proverbs, the 4th chapter, it tells us clearly, get wisdom, get understanding. It advises us never to let them go. And I would say that right now in our nation, our world, but more specifically for our nation, we need wisdom to be guiding all of our leaders of every walk of life. And we need understanding among all people, all of us in existence. I am glad to be co-chair of the American Clergy Leadership Conference with Dr. Ki-Hoon Kim. And he brings to me a wisdom from the teachings that have guided him in the Heavenly Parent Holy Community with Father Moon and Mother Moon, and that teaching that we need to have love, a true love for one another to build strong, better relationships. I think that that is important, and I want to tell everyone who's listening today why it hits home for Marie, my wife, and I, is that for a long time we searched for such a reality that we have found existing within the Heavenly Parent Holy Community. Being United Methodists, we've worked on various social issues. Social activism is a part of our church's ID. And all of the hoping that people would come together and just love one another. Oh, we could preach it well, we could teach it well, but then to see it lived out was not there. But I have found, and I challenge everybody to get to know, to learn, to gather the wisdom and the understanding about how it came about, that there is in our time in history a people who are living this color line problem is erased. And it's the reality of being existing together and then dealing with the problems that arise, knowing who you are, and then talking in that community together. That's what America should be like. So to get there, I want to join Reverend Smith, who said about the R's, put two more there, that we really ought to be the generation of reconciliation and restoration. I believe that we can get there when all 50 states form a coalition together, coalition of leaders, clergy, community-based organization, law enforcement, all of the community servants agencies getting together, and let us work out, teach one another, teach our young people how to communicate correctly to every form of a hierarchy that may be. And that's what's existing right now in our government arena. And we need to communicate in ways that can bring about a change. But we do not do that individually. We are America. We are people of love. Let us do it together. And then just one last thing I'd like to say as we continue. I've seen not only with George Floyd, but in 1990, I was at a Los Angeles Dodgers baseball game. There was a young man that was acting kind of rudely in the game. When it was over and I was going out, and this was before Rodney King in LA, this young man was being beaten. I remember a knee being on his back, not his neck, but his back. And I went, being the clergy, just to immediately respond to go over, and an African-American cop stopped me. So 3 white cops were beating a white guy. You see, this type of abuse, it's not about race. It's really about human dignity and love. I want us to end this racial stratification in America, inequality even within our mind, and see that we are people united to be one family under God. Thank you.
Beautiful statement, as usual, Reverend Rouse. And I hope Reverend Smith is okay with adding a couple of R's to his list, which has taken on a life of its own. You're going to have to patent that, Reverend Smith, soon. But I resonate with the 2 additional R's. We started this conversation about race, and it is, so R is a prominent word, but we're giving some other R's that can help us address this. And I really like restoration and reconciliation, and your call to action for coalition of leaders that includes the faith-based community and others, including law enforcement. And really there needs to be dialogue and conversation. And I truly applaud you for the work you're doing, Reverend Rouse. Thank you for underscoring the concept that you mentioned from Father and Mother Moon of the Holy Community. And you know well that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke of the beloved community. And it's another way I see it of how do we talk about the kingdom of God, or building true community that brings us together beyond our various associations of race and ethnicity. And some say we live always in our own tribal consciousness and our own zip code consciousness. So how do we overcome that? We do need to engage one another responsibly and constructively. So I'd like to just invite a moment for the panelists to perhaps comment or something they meant to say, but due to time didn't. So if we could go to gallery mode with the panelists and then have a little conversation among panelists. If anybody would like to add a point, affirm something that someone said, or perhaps tweak it a little bit, let's have a little 5 minutes of discussion among the panelists.
Okay, I will start since I started this R situation, and it has grown. So let me recap. We've got rebuild, reform, restructure, revitalize, refuse, and then we've also got reconciliation, restoration, roots, and repentance. So we have really grown. Let me say this though, what's more important is that we're unified in our message, and that we come together and we unify with each other, because there's always going to be some more R's connected and some other numbers and all that, but we really got to get our hands dirty. I am so worn out from going from one side of the city to the other side of the city, to seeing our young Black men armed with weapons, to see the military in our city, to see everything that I normally go to eat and just serve in our community, to see our post offices burnt down, to try to help our senior citizens find their mail, to help them get their welfare checks and their Social Security checks and their medicine. It is disheartening. I'm worn out. I'm tired, but I'm ready to keep fighting. And so I just want us all to be unified in our message, and let God continue to push us further to do transformation for not just our city, but the world. The world it's time to be transformed.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other panelists?
Thank you, Pastor, for accepting those R's. And you're speaking of being tired. This brings to my mind again that we really need young people to step up. And I hope that we can mentor them into this. During that era when I was 12 years old, as a matter of fact, a little younger, with Martin Luther King Jr. I was brought into the mix. We brought young people in. I was mentored by the civil rights leaders. It's very important to know where we're to go, to let us bring them in. We do get tired, but they are strong, they are ready, they're excited. They want to know what to do. But I also want to go to Dr. Lay. This criminal justice system, help us to understand what it ought to be in America.
What our criminal justice system ought to be. It's kind of like we have the framework, we have the policies, we have the constitutional provisions, we have the statutes, but without the human element, without the right human element, this framework, this structure of laws doesn't give us what we want, doesn't give us what brings satisfaction. So I know there'll be examinations of laws and policies, and that's good. I think in general, we'll find that those things are there, and that what's missing is not in the form of legality, but it's the other type of things we're talking about on this call.
Some people refer to that as the social capital. We have the financial capital, but the social capital sometimes translated as social trust, that our solidarity and trust and our virtue, the character of the citizenry. And to some extent, there's efforts to build the good society in such a way with the legal infrastructure that we don't have to be individually good, because the law will take care of that. But we always find again and again, if we don't, as individual citizens, also have certain qualities of character and virtue, that the best system will find the loopholes to express our selfishness.
You know, I want to add one thing if I could. Could I? You know, I just want to say that, as I said, in my classroom, I've got the people who are going to be cops in Bridgeport in the future. I've got some of them, and going to be cops in other places, and they're sitting side by side with their fellow students. And, you know, the colors are mixed, and I'm committed to engendering in that classroom a you know, deeper appreciation of the humanity that links us together. And I think a lot of educators share that as well.
I think
Let me throw out a question from the audience. This comes from Dr. Donna Ferrantello and Anthony Ferrantello. They're asking about what can be done for neighborhood community revitalization to address our social problems, and are there best practices, measurable programs related to making it home ownership more possible, or educational opportunities, so that people rise out of the poverty factor that is at play in this? So if any of our panelists, I know some of you have touched on it, if you want to elaborate on that in terms of best practices and programs that are working.
I had an experience of working with the United Way, being on their board and several other community boards through the years. And with them, we worked with what was called the Community Planning Council, and to be on that board as well. And we brought in the mayor, we brought in representatives of the governor of our state, and we all worked together and studied and actually took those neighborhoods that needed to be revitalized in our area. In a particular area that we were working with, we worked out a plan, a 20-year plan for those 16 neighborhoods to be revitalized. Within that 20 years, it was done. So again, it's like taking neighborhoods in action, putting the people together, also from the ground, from the neighborhood, from the roots. Don't just think it has to be those of us who studied and researched. So it will not happen until we get the mothers and fathers of those neighborhoods too, and then get together and you can do it together.
What I'd like to add to that is also, a lot of times the resources come from the top and work their way down, and they don't get distributed properly. And so we have to begin to go at the top to the highest level, to the Senate level, to the Capitol, and make sure the people on the ground are organized enough and have the resources to rebuild and do the things that they need to do. That's been the problem, that we've always worked top down, and we've got to stop doing that.
Honorable Sanchez.
Yes, well, I would like to say several things. First, it is my personal belief, and some of you may not agree, but we have seen such a gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
You know, we're looking at Bezos, Amazon guy being the first trillionaire, for example.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, because of the housing recession that we had in 2008, and now because of COVID and the types of people who have lost their jobs, we're going to see even a more dramatic impact between those who don't own their home, don't have any kind of nest egg, equity building type of institution for themselves. So we're going to see even more 1% of the people having everything and the rest of us moving down the ladder into a lower economic condition. The fact that we have spent so much money and will need to spend more money at the federal level, really putting ourselves in so much debt to get out of this COVID situation in order to move forward, that is going to put a lot of pressure on any programs that would normally come out of the federal government to help with community rebuilding, with community development. But I think it's imperative that we get to those Congress people to ensure that some amount of monies are coming down to our local levels to work on these issues. And as to best practices for that, Floyd Flake was a Congress member from the Queens, and he was also a pastor. He eventually left the Congress, and I asked him, Floyd, why are you leaving the Congress? He said, Loretta, I am making such an impact with community development in my area and getting jobs and stuff with the things I now know how to do and knowing how to work the Congress for that, that I actually have to leave the Congress to make sure that economic empowerment happens in the Queens for my community. So I think that that is a great place to go and look as a model to bring around and to figure out how to work towards getting community jobs, good jobs, not what I call fake jobs, where we pay the minimum wage to act like we've done something for them. So those would be my comments.
Loretta, that's very good. I was in Floyd's office and he said the same thing to me. With that, Dr. Walsh, I think we go to what you mentioned earlier. It kind of comes to individuals, but then individuals working cooperatively together and collectively.
Yes.
Peace starts with me, as we went through. I mean, it really hits on with where we are talking about. And then building those relationships, talking about another R, Reverend Smith. We need good, solid, sincere relationship, even with the 1%.
Yes. Gloria?
Yes, I'd like to just add on to that I work individually with women. My full-time job is I work at a pregnancy resource clinic. So I work with women coming in crisis. And what I've found is that working with these mostly single moms, some couples, married, not married, but just teaching them the basics of understanding their money. You just would be surprised at how many don't understand the checking account, don't understand the savings account, have no clue what their credit report looks like. All of these little details are the things that help make individual families successful. You can be a single mom and be successful in your family, so these are the little things that they need support in the communities, one by one family at a time, one household at a time. And it has proved very successful. I had two young moms, just to give you a quick example. Both were pregnant. They came to our center, our clinic, and they went through their pregnancy with us, and we do what we call a coach approach. So when they come in and we find out they're pregnant and they want to go through our program, we have empowers, we have equips and embrace. And when they start our program, they get a client advocate life coach. All of our client advocates are certified life coaches as well.
Right.
And they walk with that woman all the way through to help her navigate the things that have held her back and find out where she is in her life and what she wants to do. And that seems to have helped. I had 2 of them go through training. One came out as a administrative medical assistant, and she wants to go on to be to get her LPN license. So these are avenues and steps that she can take that let her know it's not so far off. I can be successful. So I think working with them individually help changes. Beautiful.
Great concept. Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Thank you, Gloria, and to all of our panelists. This is just a beautiful experience. I'm encouraged by today's dialogue and understanding. I believe God has prepared people in every single profession, every religion, every nation, every culture to rise up together at this time. And I'm encouraged. I believe that God inspired America, but not just for America, for the whole world, because all races, all religions, all cultures ended up here, and we've been working it out for the last 2 centuries and still working on it. But always these times of crisis seem to produce great changes in history. And, I remember Sojourner Truth and also Reverend Lyman Beecher, who was an abolitionist, head of Lane Seminary in Cincinnati. His daughter was Harriet Beecher Stowe, and she changed the thinking really impacted the thinking of America, especially President Lincoln. And President Lincoln rose up. And then God gave us Dr. Martin Luther King. And today God has given us Gloria and Reverend V.J. Smith and Reverend Rouse and Honorable Sanchez. And God has prepared people within the Democratic Party. And I love them. Danny Davis in Chicago. God has prepared Republicans that are godly people. That's why one of the things that happened at the World Summit that many of you attended was the fact that people could not believe that major Muslim prime ministers and people from different African countries could come together with nations in Asia that had a communist background to nations from South America, Central America. And the greatest thing of all was that, Mother Moon is really clear about even embracing Kim Jong-un in North Korea, that the only way to bring peace is not by military, not by force. We need to defend ourselves, but only by love and engagement. And Gloria, touching your hair, that's awesome. That's what Pastor T.L. Barrett did with me in Chicago. He said, touch my hair, and we started touching each other's hair. We want to, we really want God to guide us now. There are great people. Dr. Walsh is rising up to help this nation bring all God's people together, but we got to get rid of our own prejudice. We can't think Democrats are bad or Republicans are bad or communists even. We don't agree with some of the things that people do. We don't agree with the looters and the vandals, but we got to redeem them. We got to save them. So that's why I think UPF is on track with ACLC for this time. Such a time as this, Dr. Rouse. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I think, Dr. Jenkins, that's a beautiful and call to action. We are out of time. I owe an apology we have more than 400 people viewing this webinar. It's attracted great interest, and we'll be sending out a copy widely to thousands and thousands of people all over the world, and you will get copies, and I hope you will share widely, because I think this is one piece that can give encouragement and inspiration that through dialogue we can come to understand one another better.
Very much.
Dialogue is not just about talking, but as was said, listening, because we can learn from each other. We've got a lot of truth in our heads, but we're missing some pieces too. So let's work together. I thank you all. You really performed beautifully, and I think the chat from the audience has just been rolling through nonstop. So we'll also send you some of that chat information. All right. Have a great day, great week until we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank
God bless.
you.
Thank
God bless
you.
you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you all. Thank you.